Black is beautiful. Yes, it is. Black is beautiful. Black is beautiful.
No justice, no peace. I'm Janelle.
And I'm Kalia.
And welcome to DMLK's The Take. This series will address the inequities students face in education today. We will discuss how to keep our resolution alive by having conversations with key people involved in the implementation, sustainability, and overall success of our resolution. In last week's episode, we discussed the culturally sustaining curriculum and instruction department's vision of seeing Black, Indigenous, and student of color representation in the curriculum. We clarified that all students will be able to learn about their history and the history of their communities and will be honored by their families by acknowledging their contributions past and present. We also learned that the CSCI department will help all students see how their contributions are essential to our community, our nation, and our world. For me, last week's episode served as a prime example of the power within student voice and what can happen when student activists collaborate with key people to advocate for what they want and need in their education.
Speaking to Mr. Shaw, Ms. Bassett, and Mr. Torres not only reaffirmed for me their status as strong co-conspirators of ours, but also just set an even better example of what collaboration between students and leaders in DPS should look like. And just going off of that, I'm sure you guys are wondering what's up this week. This is our take on Uplift Suasion. As stated in the book Stamped, this term originated when Black people, slaves, started to get freed. Abolitionists urged the newly freed slaves to go to church regularly, learn to speak proper English, learn math, adopt trades, get married, stay away from smoking and drinking, and basically live what they would consider more respectable lives. Basically, live like white people. It's the concept that if Black people behaved admirably, they could prove all stereotypes about them wrong. This strategy was called Uplift Suasion. Black people couldn't be accepted as themselves, so they were forced to conform to the standard of whiteness in order to be deserving of rights and their freedom. You may be asking, why are we talking about this? Minority students are constantly pushed into a mold in which the curriculum we are being taught does not fit us, a mold where the misrepresentation and non-representation of people of color is a norm, a mold where teaching strategies aren't built for us, and yet we are expected to do well in a system clearly designed for us to fail. Uplift Suasion.
In today's episode, we will be speaking to District Department Content Chairs Capucine, Chapman, Director of Arts and Physical Education, Anna Pendleton, Director of Language and Literacy, and Susan Olezene, Director of Science, Social Studies, and World Languages. Welcome and thank you for joining us today on The Take. Before we get started, we must remind our listeners of our trigger alert. Kalia, can you please read the trigger alert?
If you are not 110% in support of Black Lives Matter, please dismiss yourself. If you are in any sort of agreement with the systemic oppressions this country has inflicted on minorities, once again, please dismiss yourself. And if you are not willing to give every bit of power that the people so undeniably deserve, then please dismiss yourself. Because in a few moments, you will witness vast amounts of Black engagement. And if you do not dismiss yourself, then the thoughts, facts, and feelings we are about to share will most definitely dismiss you.
So before we begin today's episode, we would like for our guests to introduce themselves and provide some background.
Hi there, I'll go first. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to join you today. It's really an honor to be here with you. My name is Anna Pendleton, and like you said, I'm the Director of Language and Literacy for the district. I have been a middle school teacher and a curriculum developer before moving into this role. And again, thank you so much for having us.
Me, Susan? Olezene, and I'm the Director of Science, Social Studies, STEM, Personalized Learning and Data-Driven Instruction, and no longer the Director of World Languages because our new multilingual education department is now overseeing world languages as part of the biliteracy initiative. I've been in education for over 40 years. I've been a middle school teacher, an elementary elementary principal, a supervisor of principals, and have worked in curriculum and instruction for about 20 years.
So hello, everybody, and thank you again for this opportunity, and kudos to you guys for what you're doing. Capucine Chapman, I'm the Director for Arts and Physical Education, and under the umbrella of Arts and Physical Education is visual art, theater, dance, music. We also have adapted physical education, comprehensive health, sex education. So those are a lot of different courses. We also have our citywide events for students for all of those contents to participate in. I oversee the costume shop, and we also have our resource department. Like Susan, pretty much my experience has always been in education. A visual art teacher in the classroom. Been in central office for, close to 15 years now. What else do you need to know about me? I probably the most important, I think, that's pertinent to this dialogue is the identity conversation. So I'm going to say it just because I think it's important. So I always like to call it this way. I wear a lot of different coats. So one of the coats that I wear is that of a mother, parent, sister, friend, colleague, educator. I'm Hispanic, grew up poor, 4 sisters, spoke Spanish at home, English outside of the home. My mother's side of the family comes from an indigenous group in Chihuahua, Mexico. We grew up in the cultural arts. So my family just really has a spectrum of a lot of experience. So I'm really grateful that the majority of my whole life has been geared on my soul identity. Culturally, specifically, is like my identity is that of a spirit with a lot of different expressions that I'm able to learn through. So that's who I am.
Thank you all so much, Ms. Chapman, Ms. Pendleton, and Ms. Olezene, for taking time out of your day to come onto the podcast and speak to us. I really appreciate it, me and Kalia.
Yes, same. We're so glad to have you on here, and just to get your perspectives. And just to start off, I'd like to ask, are you all familiar with the No Justice, No Peace resolution and what it entails?
We are. I think if my colleagues are okay with me speaking for us based on just the work that our team has done so far, I think we understand 2 main purposes for the resolution. First, and I think this one is really important, it's just an unequivocal statement of the district's commitment to ensure racial representation in all of our courses that our students access. We ultimately want to decenter whiteness and really reflect the richness of contributions of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And then I think second is sort of an outline for what that means for the work of the academics division, which we all work in terms of curriculum revisions, the feedback loops our curriculum will go through, and then professional learning, all of that in service of culturally representative, anti-racist, and humanizing instruction is the goal.
That's really good that you guys know that, because one really big thing that we want to focus on is that we're not just focusing on getting changes implemented to just social studies or just history courses, but all over the place, because over the last few years, that we truly believe that every part of DPS, every facet could just benefit from having more racial representation. And since I kind of get the impression that you guys know like a general idea of the resolution, so I'd like to ask each of you your first impressions. And I'd actually like to start with you, Ms. Olezene, because I know that you were at our faculty meeting last year. And just starting with you, what were your initial thoughts around our ask and our presentation? And then the rest of you, what were just your general impressions of the resolution at first sight, I guess?
Well, gosh, first and foremost, I was very touched by your presentation. I hope you know that. Your experience at the National Museum of African American History was powerful, and how you told your stories was powerful. The story that you told that impacted me the most was that you hadn't heard those stories in your K-12 education experience. And that you called to action not only your own social studies teachers, but us, the academics division and the social studies team, to ensure that the curriculum that you experience does have multiple perspectives. And you actually advocated not only for the Black perspective, but also of other races to be represented as well. And I think that was powerful. And I think what was really powerful is the fact that the student advocacy and your action that you took as a result of that trip for change is to be commended. And that's one of the goals of social studies, is social activism and in taking informed action. And just so you know, too, that it's not just social studies, but I also oversee science and STEM, and it's important for those curricula to represent all students as well.
First of all, I'm going to say bravo. That my initial reading on it was what a great way for students to start flexing their muscles, their voices, their thoughts. So that was the one thing. It's elevating the need for learning to incorporate student voice, but not just student voice, the student experience. So that was my initial thought. And the other initial thought I had was, I'm really hoping that it's a living document. It's a living, breathing document. It's not stagnant. It's a really good stab at, here's what we need to say right now and for today. And that through the course of all of these dialogues, that we, all of us, embrace and open up to, what else can we say? You know, is there another way to say it, or is there something we missed? So that's what I mean by a living, breathing document, that it has great opportunity to have a really good foundation, but to also become even greater than what maybe we're imagining right now. And that's definitely going to be in all of our hands, but primarily you guys. And I think the other thing is, I'm really curious to see where the teaching voice, or it's not the teaching voice, the learning part of that diagram or that document can be expanded upon. So just that's the one thing that I thought, I'm looking for learning in there. But I think that's the opportunity that's in front of us. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I will first echo what Susan and Cap shared. I really admire and am moved by your advocacy, both personally and as a leader of curriculum in the district. I guess just one thing that I would add to what has already been said is that I do really, really believe that K-12 curriculum is a critical lever for social change, that it can improve our society as a whole. And I think it is incredibly powerful that you have pushed for increased focus on this, because again, I think it can have a real significant impact.
I definitely agree with what all of you said, and it really warms my heart to know that you guys believe in this resolution and are a part of the collaboration to be able to help the society progress, and for us to be able to have these conversations surrounding race, and these very, very important conversations that will help every individual in our society, not just people of color. And as the head of your department, what will each of you do in your position to uphold the resolution?
You know, I can start with that one. You know, it's become an integral part of the work of my team. It's integral to the continuous improvement of our curriculum that we do each year. We've actually created milestones to meet the objectives in the resolution. So the curriculum audits, the feedback loops. It played a key role in the selection of our elementary social studies curriculum for K-5 elementary. It's included in my annual goals as well as my staff member goals of how we're upholding the resolution. And I think one key critical point is the inclusion of student voice as a part of those feedback loops and continuous improvement of our resource.
I'm really invested in this work for literacy. I think in terms of responsibility, broadly speaking, I think the resolution does a really, really nice job of outlining the buckets. It's my responsibility to ensure that we're selecting, creating, and revising curriculum materials that are representative, humanizing, anti-racist, and that we're providing access to meaningful and aligned professional learning for teachers so that they can put that into action. And then I would say, too, it's really important to me as a leader to recognize my own limitations and my own perspective. I'm really committed to the work of anti-racism and committed to continuous learning and improvement. And I'm also a white woman. So I know that we've got talented, creative, and really wise educators of color in our district. And I see my role beyond what is explicitly stated in the resolution as being one of including and inviting those voices to the table and amplifying the voices of educators of color as we do this work moving forward. And just to give a little shout out, I'm really grateful to Whitney Weathers, who is an assistant principal at Manual High School, who has consistently pushed the academics division and me personally in that direction.
Yeah, as an educational leader, I first of all, I think it's important for you guys to know that I really anchor my leadership in a couple of things. It's always investing in the self, making sure that I'm always critical and examining my own thinking lens. And I think by doing that, I develop myself as a better person to help be co-leading as well as leading a great team. And by doing that, we can also start working very consciously to develop all of our curriculum and our curriculum resources for something bigger and better than what we can imagine right now. So how I'm going to lead the work is how I have been doing it. I mean, I first of all, hire really good people, hire people that are willing to invest in themselves. And by that, I mean, in order for anything to change or move forward, you've got to have people that are willing to examine themselves first and foremost, and are willing to then be vulnerable and share what it is that they know, they don't know, and to change and grow. I mean, at the heart of education, and I believe this with everything within me, and it's that as educators, we have the most important duty in any kind of career path ever, and that is to develop and or shape another human being. And I take that to heart, and I think that's what all of us as educators should really examine. But in order to do that, in order to ask and shape someone else, we've got to be willing to do that ourselves first. And so that is always going to be what I anchor to in my leadership. And that will help facilitate any other decisions that are being made towards making sure this living document thrives. It doesn't stay stagnant.
I feel like everything you guys said was really, really interesting. And I just know that, it's kind of hard to imagine, like, just from my perspective as a student, imagine like hundreds of schools with a bunch of different courses that all fall into different subcategories, and you guys are all in charge of those. That's kind of hard for me to kind of, I guess, imagine. So I feel like with this resolution, it puts into perspective a lot more like your individual commitments and what you're doing within your own, I guess, practices as your heads of your chairs. It just really puts in perspective for me. And I just want to ask, assuming that you all have done audits to your own curriculums, what did this audit reveal to you, and what adjustments have been made based on those results?
We first conducted internal audits of the 8th grade U.S. history and 10th grade U.S. history courses with a diverse team of DPS teachers. And we found a few things that needed to change. One of the examples of that was some of the performance tasks that were still very centered on the white narrative. So we changed that. We also learned that through the audit that the teachers weren't necessarily using the suite of resources to as best as they could, or giving access to the students So one of the changes we made was then providing professional learning to the teachers so that they could better access those resources. And then we actually provided those resources to the 8th grade teachers who didn't have access to them before. So that's just a couple of the things. I think we also learned that conversations of race and identity are not always easy for teachers, especially teachers who are not teachers of color. So one of the things that we are trying to do is provide professional learning. And we reached out to a group that you might have heard of called Facing History and Ourselves. And they supported teachers in understanding race and membership. The other thing is we're not done examining or auditing our 8th grade and 10th grade U.S. history courses because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And we asked an outside team of experts to audit the curriculum. And we should receive the results of that curriculum in February. And then based on that, those findings, we'll make another set of changes. And as a part of No Justice, No Peace, one thing to remember is we're trying to get feedback after the history units are taught and getting both student and teacher feedback. So we're trying to get as much feedback as possible in order to improve.
Yeah, I can speak to literacy for a bit. As a literacy team, we are constantly reviewing and revising the literacy curriculum. So I can share a few of the things that we've done this year. In the central office, we have a team that works specifically on culturally responsive education. And so they've been really great and important partners for us this year. And in particular, we partnered with that team this year to review all of our central texts in middle school and high school. And we worked to develop guidance for teachers that speak specifically to how to address and deliver the content in ways that are trauma-informed and humanizing, according to the topics of the books in each unit. And then we've included all of those supports in all of our teacher professional learning this year. And then in terms of the curriculum resources themselves, we've made lots of revisions, both small and big ones. We've revised many of our unit assessments to increase representation. We've revised shorter sets of lessons, again, to increase representation or to switch out texts in service of ones that featured narratives of triumph rather than struggle, for example. We created a new unit in partnership with a group of teachers with a central text written by a Mexican author. Again, we identified that as a glaring hole in our curriculum that we hadn't featured a Mexican author in the high school grades. And then another example is that we are currently working on writing a new unit in middle school around To Kill a Mockingbird in consultation with a national expert in culturally responsive approaches to literacy instruction.
Yeah, so you guys may not know this, but the Arts and PE department, we develop all of our curriculum and our curriculum resources. So so we have the task of, and I think it's to our advantage, to be quite honest, that we get to work across departments and within our own CSCI team to share the knowledge and experience around what's effective curriculum, what are resources. Every year, my team, we do professional learning within our own team about updating our knowledge, expertise, and the new information out there around curriculum and curriculum development. We are updated. We're constantly reinvigorating what it means to understand assessment and assessment literacy as it pertains. So that's what we do within my department in and of itself. So we don't do the auditing process as my other colleagues do. But with that, we also, teachers have the option of using our curriculum or not. And if they decide to use our curriculum, they can also have the option of embedding their own, expanding on it, making it more personalized for their own school or their community lens. But the one thing that we do with our curriculum is we really are focused on creating as many student-centered learning experiences within the curriculum. So it's one thing to have the curriculum, but it's also another thing to have and support our teachers to create those learning experiences. Another thing that we do from an auditing position is we bring in teacher leaders to help us also work with and develop these curriculums. And then we have teacher leaders also cascade some of the teaching and the resources to their colleagues in form of cohorts. So that's what we do.
Are any of you familiar with the article Ending Curriculum Violence? For any listeners that don't know what the article basically entails, it is an article that helps reflect on the district curriculum as you continue to adopt an anti-racism framework and pedagogy. And it also helps to identify if curriculum or lessons are primarily focused on Black and Brown histories in regards to trauma, pain, or death, because we know that that can be very detrimental to a child and learning that, and that being the only representation that you see of yourself in schools. But we know that oppressive practices exist at every level within schools, and people who work in every department at the district level have a role and stake in this work. So while your job as the department chair is important, what is your plan to ensure that it is not compartmentalized within one or a few people?
Hey, Janelle, before we kind of answer that one, do you guys mind if I kind of address the other article that you mentioned?
Definitely.
So one thing that I think is really, here's what I'm going to say. Our teams are consistently challenging ourselves to create teacher professional learning that also develops the teacher's ability to self-regulate and self-examine their own teaching practices. And it's really important to understand that curriculum has no power. So really, curriculum in and of itself, it's just a document, it's just something written. So by itself, it has to be activated. And that's the thing we're really truly focusing on. That's where the learning comes in, this relationship with the teacher and the learners. And that's just so complex. And just as an example for that, and I know I'm taking it out of the context of education, but I have 4 sisters, and the five girls in a household have 2 parents. And for the most part, we all had similar teachings, right? So you could say that our parents were delivering a certain form of curriculum, but each one of us as sisters has taken away something very unique and very different from that learning. And so it's complex. So, right, the teacher and student relationship is very different. And I think, Kalia, you said it very, very wisely from the beginning. We have how many teachers and how many students? And every teacher walks in with their own history, their own experiences, their own version of what education is. And then couple that with a curriculum that they've been given that they're trying to enact or deliver. And then you bring in students, and every student comes in with their own experiences, their own background. So it's complex. And that's, it's something we take seriously, and it's something that can be resolved like immediately. But I think it's important to bring that to the surface, that we're aware of it. And it's not an easy thing to change, but it's there. Does that make sense?
Yes, that definitely makes sense.
Just to move forward a little bit, I feel like it's essential that we all know, and just for everyone to know, that teachers and leaders, well, it's actually just essential in general that teachers and leaders do not intellectualize our stories and histories of racial trauma and further perpetuate kind of a savior mentality that ultimately inspires pity instead of encouraging people to understand us and become co-conspirators against racism. And teachers must work to solely create success for all students by design. And with this in mind, what have you begun to think about the books and resources that will be implemented for future professional development?
So we're always learning and growing in this area, and working with different experts and folks. So part of our continuous improvement process is continuing to add to that suite of resources for both teachers and students. This February, Dr. LeGarrette King, he's the founding director for the Carter Center for K-12 Black History Education. He's also an associate professor at the University of Missouri-Columbia. He's going to present to our social studies teachers, and he focuses on Black love and acknowledging the work and achievements by and from African Americans themselves, and balancing that with not sugarcoating historical events. And so what that could look like would be ensuring that students have access to resources directly from African Americans themselves, and celebrating and connecting to that work with their own communities and themselves, as well as other things. He's also developed a framework called Black Historical Perspectives. And so that's exciting. And the other thing is we have our very own culturally responsive education team that supports us in facilitating professional learning and conversations about race. And we're continuing to learn how to do that in the most appropriate and effective ways.
Yeah, Kalia, thank you for that question. I feel like there's a lot of interesting stuff to dig into there. Again, I think I'll give one specific example around literacy. So we really felt that one of our 8th grade units, which was centered around To Kill a Mockingbird, perpetuated that kind of white savior mentality that you mentioned in your question. The materials really focused on Atticus and his defense of Tom, and we just didn't feel comfortable with that. So we are now writing an entirely new unit with To Kill a Mockingbird. And this one, really excited about, it begins with grounding in Ibram Kendi's work about how to be anti-racist, and then asks our 8th grade students to read the whole To Kill a Mockingbird novel through that lens and that framework instead. And in February, we'll have a national expert with us leading professional learning around this work for our 8th grade teachers. So our 8th grade teachers are going to have the opportunity to come, and in this PD, they'll have some time for some self-exploration. They will hear about some important history surrounding racial issues that are brought forward in the book. And then they'll use both that kind of self-exploration and that history to prepare to deliver the content, the new content, in responsible and humanizing ways.
That's also, it reminds me also of so many other things that we're doing, and you don't have time to hear all of that right now. But one thing that I'll take a different slant in terms of this question, while still embracing the things that my colleagues have said, but I'll just say it in another way of how we approach it. And you may even like this answer, but I really believe if there's a theme that I'm really focusing on is student-centered learning. But at the core of what we're really trying to create with our learning experiences that the student or the learner is the first person scientist. So it's really important to, for example, we have an elementary visual art curriculum about heroes that covers different heroes across different cultures. But instead of saying the hero said this in this regard, you learn about all of them, but then it's the student's responsibility to then investigate within themselves, the hero within themselves. What does that mean? And then that's what I mean by the more we can create learning experiences so that the student is the first person scientist. They're examining, they're making meaning, they're beginning to regulate their own learning. They're directing the curriculum that they then want to keep developing. So that's one of the things that we really are focusing on. And again, it's a different slant of the kind of the way the question is asked, but I can't iterate it enough that it's so important to help our students make meaning out of whatever it is that they're being taught. And the only way that I can see that is that we have to keep creating experiences for the students to then tell us. Like, I would love for both you and Janelle to just be able to come back and say, I decided to do this different thing, and these are the things that I learned from it. And, you know, you're already building your inner portfolio of the work you need to do for the rest of your life by doing that. And that's the opportunity that I see, to stop doing something. In order to stop doing something, we need to open the doors for you guys to start bringing your own inner authority out and really wrestling with it. What does this look like? What am I seeing? What do I need to examine? What do I need to do differently? That's my answer.
Sorry, I just want to say I completely agree. Like, I actually find that really interesting, because I know, like, one thing that we were uncomfortable with with our education with Black history before all the resolution was that it kind of felt like we were being forced a type of Black history that wasn't representative of us fully, and it just felt like it wasn't happening naturally. We weren't getting the full story, and I feel like that example of students like kind of governing their own education from what they're being given, I feel like that's something that could like happen in the near future with what we're doing with our resolution, by giving students all of the important information they need and then letting them decide what they want to do with it. And I just find that like really interesting that you brought that up. And just to speak on, to kind of get back to the concept of anti-racism within everything, right now and for a while, the concept of anti-racism and equity work have kind of been romanticized and glamorized. They're practically buzzwords to make people doing subpar work feel better about putting in the bare minimum. And like a lot of social justice movements at the moment, once they become mainstream, everybody decides to claim them to make themselves feel better about being ignorant. It kind of loses meaning and value. And I guess with this in mind, how do each of you plan on contributing to truly effective and long-lasting anti-racist and equity work in DPS long after it falls out of popularity?
Thank you for another rich question. I think that you're right about that being a danger. I agree with you. And I also think I haven't been in the district quite as long as my colleagues here. But for about a decade, I've experienced a lot of shifts in DPS. And I would say that I think that this focus on equity and racial justice feels different than those other shifts. I don't think we've arrived, and I think we fall short. And I know that I, as an individual, do all the time. But it does really feel like we are fundamentally changing the way that we approach our work in a way that I'm really optimistic will actually last. I know just for myself, like I can't unsee what has been made apparent to me. And I commit to continuous improvement in our curriculum and professional learning. And I can speak on behalf of my team in saying that as well.
Yeah, so I've been in Denver Public Schools since the end of my elementary grades, and I went to middle school and high school in DPS. And throughout that time, these are some things that were occurring. I mean, I was part of the busing era. There were riots that were going on. I remember being part of a lot of race against race fighting. My dad was shot as a result of trying to fight two people that were supposedly on the same team because they wanted to be the stronger voice, against, so in other words, the cycles of this is taken a different iteration, right? But it's been in our history for a long time, and it's been in our educational history for a while. And I've lived through it. I've been part of it, just like you guys are living through this period right now in your educational life. So I think I'm going to, again, be a repetitive person. I think the one thing that's going to change that, as opposed to us cycling back again, it's about really, really deeply examining student-centered learning. And there's so many ways that we've been educating that it's got to go away now. The way we're doing teaching and learning has got to shift. And I think the way that we can open the door to that is, again, for student-centered learning. And that requires that will open up so many things. A student's individual, their inner ecological wisdom is going to open up. We're going to hear from you, and we need to. So again, I think there's so much memory, historical and through ancient knowledge, that is coming through. And I think you guys are hearing it, whether you are consciously able to say that that's what you're hearing or not, you're hearing it. And it's echoing and it's resonating in the podcast that you're doing and the document that you represented, the people that you're bringing to this. There's so much rich stuff underneath the surface of some of the stuff that I'm hoping that I have great hope that this cycle will change, because you guys are changing the course in a different way than we did during my time period.
Well, Anna and Capucine were very eloquent in their answers. And what I could say is, and they've both been in the district longer than I have. I'm just old. But I think what's significant, what's different about this is that it's both internal work as well as external work. We've never asked people before to examine their internal biases, and we've never asked white people to examine them as a race. And I think that's, so discovering my own biases as a white woman, how those play in my work, how I've contributed to the systemic racism, and then what actions I can do to break or disrupt those is really important. And we haven't approached it in that way before, if that makes sense. So I think that internal piece is just as important. And I've begun that journey, and there's no there. And I can say that I'm committed. I think the teachers are committed, given just the whole process that we went through with the K-5 social studies curriculum. There's a lot of commitment to figuring out how we get culturally sustaining and anti-racist curriculum in the hands of our students and our teachers. And I can give you that promise of continuous improvement of our resources and professional learning as well. And I want to tell you that I have a professional stake in that, as well as a personal stake, as I raised a biracial daughter. And I now have a 3-month-old biracial grandson. And so it's important for me to be able to say that what your activism is creating could result in him seeing himself in the curriculum and who he is and those experiences. And I also lead a team of really incredible, dedicated professionals who also share that commitment and promise. So professionally and personally, that's what I commit to you, that I continue to get better and do this work and grow every year, every month, every day.
And I hope it's okay. I'm just going to add one other thing about the equity portion of that question. It's such a complex question. And equity is so complex. So there's complexity. The complexity theory is probably a really good one to investigate. But I think this is another charge that we as a district, I'm hoping that we continue to have a conversation about what does that really mean? Because we can provide equitable access to 5 people. And again, I'll use my family as an example. 5 of us get the same information, but even the way it's delivered, we don't enter into it from an equitable place, because we all have we think differently. Even if it's a little different, it's still different. And then the outcomes are never going to be equitably the same, because what each one of us will, and each one of you will take from that learning experiences is very unique to you. So I think equity is a really good question, but I'm also hoping that we push ourselves to understand that on another level, because it's complex. So I just wanted to add that.
In honesty, like not to get off track, but I completely understand what you're saying with that, because it's kind of hard to figure out how we're going to move forward with the new standard of equity when the definition of equity is giving somebody what they specifically need so that they could be equal to everyone else. And it's kind of hard to give everyone equity when we don't really know what status we want to, I guess, have it on a scale of. And I feel like I had a thought in the back of my head, but I'm really interested in what you just said. I feel like how we're moving forward with equity in the district is really important if we're going to come up with a new standard of how we actually measure it. And like, because for us, like, we don't expect every student to like learn Black history and all of a sudden be like us and start their podcast and do whatever. We don't expect that for anybody, and we don't want that for anybody because it's hard work and it's a lot. But like, I feel like with the Black history we're learning, I feel like if anything, it'd be detrimental to only give these students Black history, to give them the expectation like, okay, now go out and be a civil rights leader or go out and do whatever, when really it's just, you should, like, students, they deserve this knowledge, whether they want to do anything with it or not, they deserve it. And I feel like that's just something really important to think about, how we're going to measure equity and what expectations we will or will not have of students once they have this education and once they have this equity. And I just like to ask, as the people directly in charge of what we and the thousands of students in DPS learn, I guess you kind of already answered this, but in more of a focused position, what are your individual commitments to implementing the No Justice, No Peace resolution with importance in your content areas? And what have you done to prepare teachers to teach this new content? And lastly, if you have an action plan, would you share it?
You know, first and foremost, and I'm going to be really briefer than I have been, is continuous improvement of the resources through the audits, through community feedback, through teacher feedback, through student feedback, and those feedback loops, and then continued professional learning. How do we continue to learn about race and anti-racism and what that means for everybody in this learning community?
First of all, Clea, if you decide that you don't want to go into environmental science, not that I'm trying to persuade you out
Science.
But if you're interested, what you were just talking about sounds a whole lot like the meetings that we have. How do we measure equity? What does this look like? So you could have another career path available to you, just if you want to consider it. But I agree with Susan. I will be brief and highlight a couple of things that I've said. Like Susan, I commit to continuous improvement of our resources in response to our self-assessment and the feedback that we receive per the resolution. And I also, I think it's important that I commit, and I do commit, to inviting and paying educators of color to contribute to the curriculum and professional learning work as we move forward.
Again, I'll try to make this brief. I commit to continue to be myself and do my own work that I need to do, as well as bring it to the surface. Because I definitely am going to give myself a pat on the back for this one, that, you know, I bring in a different lens or a different perspective or a different way of looking at things. And not that it's better or worse, it's just different than what maybe sometimes normal education does. And I think that I will also take the lead from you guys around taking a risk and initiating things such as a podcast, or initiating an idea of just taking an idea. I just think my team is committed to constantly, again, the broken record, being student-centered, and anything that we could create is at that pivotal point. It's student-centered work. So whatever we create, it will support the work that you guys are asking us to do, because it's not separate. All of it is connected. So those are my commitments. But I think I'm hoping that you guys ask all of your teachers and your leaders to invest in themselves and to do some self-learning and their own self-growth and development, because we need to learn from you, but in order to do that, we've got to do our own work ourselves. So that's what I would offer.
I really, really love what you just said, because I know for some reason a lot of people don't feel like teachers are learning from their students, and you just saying that our teachers and our leaders are able to learn from us in student-centered work is really important to me, and it really does warm my heart. And for each of you guys' responses, I would really like to thank you for those. And Also, thank you guys for coming on to the Take today, because we were honored to be able to have this conversation with you, and we strongly appreciate your cooperation and dedication to improve this district and the education of the students that are in it.
I want to say thank you. Remember, you guys are leaders already. And so just as long as you keep staying open, look 10 years from now, you guys are going to add on to all this wealth of information you're doing. So bravo and good job to your parents.
We feel honored to be here, so thank you for inviting us to be a part of your journey.
Agreed, very honored, and that was a lot of fun. Thank you.
On today's episode, we talked to District Department Content Chairs Capucine Chapman, Director of Arts and Physical Education, Anna Pendleton, Director of Language and Literacy, and Susan Olezene, Director of Science, Social Studies, and World Languages. We started off discussing the definition of Uplift Suasion and how, since the institution of education was not built for us, it is consistent in knocking us down. In order for us to stop the cycle that was built for us to fail, we must have these hard conversations and discover the importance of learning our history. We cannot set standards for what we deserve if we don't know how poorly we've been treated in the past. Education is power, and our students reserve the right to a fair and progressive education that doesn't limit them because of the color of their skin or the assimilationists who decided it. On April 12, 1860, the Senator Jefferson Davis, on the floor of the United States Senate, while arguing against a bill funding Black education in the nation's capital, argued that this government was not founded by Negroes nor for Negroes, but by white men for white men. He continued by emphasizing inequality between Blacks and whites was stamped from the beginning. This speech was delivered over 18 months before Davis would be elected president of the Confederacy. We stand before you nearly 160 years later because that very sentiment is still present in Denver public schools, where students exist in a system not designed for them, and that perpetuates the very inequality Davis was so proud of. Let me be clear. The system is working exactly as it was designed. It is getting the precise results it is supposed to get. The system we are forced to endure would make Jefferson Davis proud. So here's our call to action. We need dramatic changes. Resolutions and proclamations are not enough. We don't need allies. Being an ally is lazy. An ally can run for elected office on platforms of equity and pretty words but offer no actions. Allies can respond to emails and please with, "Thank you for your words," or "I hear you in your share frustration," but offer no actions. We need co-conspirators who are willing to redesign the curriculum. You can start by first reading this article, Ending Curriculum Violence on Tolerance.org. It is key when adopting an anti-racist framework and pedagogy. Every district department chair and teacher must look at their lessons to determine if they're teaching lessons that are primarily focused on trauma, pain, or death. Then do something about it. Adjust the lessons and the conversations to meet the needs of our DPS students. Then, acknowledging that professional development must change. Mimicking the militant ways of learning, continue to place our Black and Brown students in situations where they must conform to be invited to learning spaces. When teaching teachers how to teach students that look like us, we must make it interactive, incorporating vocabulary and movement in the classroom, finding strategies that reject the idea for compliance in order to learn. In addition to this, we would also like all of you to write a letter to the school board requesting the full district adoption of Black History 365 using the template that we have provided in the chat. We can't emphasize enough that everyone can benefit from learning about everyone's culture. It is time for us to know ourselves, where we come from, and our struggles. Our history matters, our history is real, and it deserves to be taught and acknowledged. Make sure you give us your feedback through our social media and contact us for a chance to be on the show and give us your take.